Welcome to the France 24 debate. We're examining the crisis between Iran and the United States. The world has entered 2020 with the threat level at its highest for many years. Let's show you these scenes in Tehran at the heart of the matter. Iran mourning the death of one of its most influential figures. Qasem Soleimani was killed in a US drone strike on January the 3rd, last Friday. Soleimani led the crack military Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guard. He was regarded as the second most powerful man in Iran and key to Iran's regional reach and influence. His killing is raising important questions worldwide. And the rhetoric is rising fast and in a very dangerous manner. Threats of revenge from the highest level in Tehran. And equally from Washington, more threats of military strikes with Iran's cultural sites the potential target. US bases and interests worldwide could well become targets, and as well as those of their allies, such as France, and the rest of the EU and the UK. So, all-out war or a protracted sequence of proxy retaliation that borders on full-on conflict. Either way, what's in store doesn't bode well for a safer world in 2020. Here to discuss the situation, we have a panel of guests, each with their own opinions on the various aspects of this very complicated story. First off, Hélène Salon, who's journalist with Le Monde and author of the book The Islamic State of Mosul, History of a Totalitarian Enterprise. Thank you very much for being with us, Hélène. On the other side of our studio, though not necessarily against, Mikey Kay, an independent foreign correspondent, former British aviation commander working for the Special Forces in Iraq. Mikey, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
In Washington, we're joined by Michael Prejean, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Michael is, you may remember if you've seen him many times on our program, former intelligence advisor to General David Petraeus and the Peshmerga forces. Michael, thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thanks.
And in London, Elie Guérin-Maillet, who is a senior policy fellow for the Middle East and North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Elie, thanks for being with us. I will start with you, if you don't mind, Elie. The situation as you see it, how nervous should we be?
Well, I think folks sitting in Europe should be more urgently than ever calling and actively looking for ways to prevent this US-Iran escalation from turning into a real hot conflict point. We've now gone over the last 6 months from an environment where the US was ratcheting up sanctions against Iran, being met with Iranian retaliation by targeting installations or drones in the Middle East, to now both sides targeting military personnel. And I think the trajectory is very dangerous ahead, and all countries in the Middle East, in Europe, should be helping the United States and Iran find a diplomatic pathway out of this.
Elie, thank you. Let's go to Michael Prejean in Washington. Michael, your thoughts?
It is a dangerous situation, but it's one we've been ignoring for a while. Iraq really didn't have a chance to address its security issues with ISIS, while Qasem Soleimani and Mohandes were actually trying to influence Baghdad and the government there. The situation, if you pay attention to it, has been growing since Qasem Soleimani reaped the benefits of the JCPOA, or the Iran deal. We saw new militias created in Iraq. We saw new lethal aid given to the Houthis in Yemen. We saw Bashar al-Assad actually being propped up by Soleimani, using money that should have gone to the Iranian people to basically prop up Assad, invite Russia in. And then the JCPOA, of course, now people are trying to tie maximum pressure and the president walking away as the reason for all of this aggression. When, if you pay attention to it, it's been going on before the JCPOA. It accelerated through the JCPOA to where we are now. I would argue that all these things would be happening regardless, because the majority of the things that are happening, if you listen to the argument, the JCPOA had nothing to do with. The JCPOA was not meant to curb Iran's behavior, and we know that because it actually accelerated Iran's malign behavior. And everything that Qasem Soleimani has been doing under the protections of the Iran deal and the constraints put on the Obama administration and then early on with the Trump administration has basically been a violation of existing UN Security Council resolutions that we've simply ignored. Ballistic missile testing, providing lethal aid to proxy groups, and conducting humanitarian attacks on his own people, and also putting down protests in Iraq and in Lebanon. Those are things that the international community should pay attention to. And now that Iran has walked away from the Iran deal, or not walked away, but scaled back its adherence to it, it's actually cheating on France, it's cheating on Germany, it's cheating on England, and on Russia and China, but there is not the response that the U.S. has. I think we would be able to de-escalate more if Iran didn't think it had a backdoor exit here, meaning the more it provokes, the more it does, Europe will eventually either cave or somehow put pressure on the next administration or this current administration after the 2020 elections. The most capable terrorist in the Middle East, more powerful than Osama bin Laden, because he had a state sponsor behind him. Qasem Soleimani was a legitimate military target. He was a designated terrorist, and he was in Iraq to conduct attacks against the American presence there. His targeting was the right thing to do.
Wasn't there a case to say that at some point, of course, he was working alongside you, and I say you, the Americans, in the fight against ISIS?
Well, see, here's how I look at that. Qasem Soleimani tried to take credit for every victory in Iraq that we credited the Iraqi Special Operations Forces for. Early on, General Petraeus wrote an op-ed saying we should not become the Air Force for Qasem Soleimani. And it's exactly what we did. Not by directly working with Qasem Soleimani and the Hashid al-Shabi, but by ignoring their role in the ISIS campaign. Their penetration of Iraq's security forces through the Badr Corps, and then their victory lap after every defeat, after every piece of terrain was taken away from ISIS in Iraq, they actually used that to win influence in Iraq's parliament, and that resulted in this vote to exit us. This vote to exit us was going to happen regardless. This was not based on Soleimani's death. This was something they've been warning about before. They just had the luxury of being able to use it as leverage against us so that we would concede a position and then have it both ways. Take money from the United States, allow Mohandes and Qasem Soleimani to grow influence in Iraq, and all of that was a miscalculation by the supreme leader and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes and Qasem Soleimani. When that attack was conducted against that American base and killing an American, and then Mohandes actually used his primacy over Baghdad to move into the green zone unopposed and attack a U.S. embassy. It was a complete miscalculation. They did not believe they were going to lose Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes because of that. That's the miscalculation.
Michael, let me pause you there. We're
so
hearing from you the words about the justification of why this happened and why he was a legitimate target. Mikey Kay here in the studio, with your experience on the ground there, what would you say?
Yeah, I just want to sort of come back to Michael on that. I just want to sort of provide a bit of context here. The reason why Qasem Soleimani, the reason why the Iranian PMUs, and the reason why the Shia clerics are so powerful inside Iraq now is because George W. Bush, Rumsfeld and Cheney broke it in 2003. And it was the decision to invade Iraq. And I was part of that invading force in 2003 from Ali al-Salem up into Basra that effectively created the catalyst for Iranians' dominance inside the region. The next big thing I'd argue is that despite America having a defense budget of over $700 billion and Iran's defense budget being somewhere in the region of $16 to $18 billion, I, from my experience, put the favor with Iran. And the reason for that is because Petraeus, and Michael will know this better than anyone, pushed for a surge of up to 170,000 US troops inside Iraq in 2008. $5.9 trillion have been spent on wars inside Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, and Afghanistan since 2001. And despite that massive amount of imbalance on defense budget, on defense capability, even the US Army, even the college has come out and said the only victor from the Iraq war was Iran. Moving that forward, wars are being fought.
Hang on, Michael.
One second, Michael. Wars are being fought today through proxy warfare. And the reason that is happening is because the UN Security Council has zero ability to implement any form of accountability on proxies. That's why they're being fought that way. Iran has been inside Syria since early 2011, 2012 with Hezbollah. I was with Hezbollah in South Lebanon and up in Hermel talking to them about their actions in there in 2013. Iran, like no other country in the world at the moment, has more experience on how to fight proxy warfare than anyone in the world. So I would argue that from the long-term perspective, it is very dangerous for America to get into a fight here with a country that knows proxy warfare inside and out and has the influence that it does through the Shia clerics inside Iraq.
Were they right to take out Soleimani?
I personally, I mean, Michael's point on was he a legitimate target? Yes, he was, but that's a short-term tactical win. You know, the old adage, you may have won the battle, but you've not won the war, I think applies to this situation. Sometimes it's better the devil you know. But what I would argue is that the reasons that America are giving for taking out Soleimani in terms of making Americans safer within the region, de-escalating, making the region more stable, is not true, because we know from the Iraqi prime minister that the Saudis were already engaged in negotiations with Iran using the caretaker Iraqi PM.
That's just a false statement.
Well,
not by you, but by the Saudis.
But that came from
not by you, but by the Saudis.
Sure, sure. So you know,
that's Thammer. Yeah.
In terms of should Qasem Soleimani been taken out, the answer for me is absolutely not, without having a strategy which is a 5 to 10 year strategy. And we know that the US had zero strategy beyond the conflict phase of the 2003 war. And that's why Iraq looks and is in the mess that it's in.
Mikey, thank you. Let's bring in Hélène from Le Monde, Hélène Salon.
Can I respond to that?
Can you give me 1 second to get a comment from Hélène? I'll come back to you, Michael. Bear with me, please, sir. Bear with me, please, sir.
Sure.
Hélène, in terms of what you've been listening to, do you feel that there's been this justification that it was the right thing to do to take out Soleimani, as Michael was saying?
I think it was really not the good thing to do and the wrong time to do it, because if you remember now, because it's already forgotten, but for 3 months the Iraqi have been demonstrating in Iraq against these Shia militias and parties, against the Iranian grip on the political, security and economic areas. And because of this strike, because of the death of Soleimani, all this movement is now maybe disappearing. I mean, in maybe 1 week or 2 weeks, there will not be any movement anymore, because there is a power of the militias that force the people to align with Soleimani and the Iranian side. So that's really a bad time for this strike to happen, for this assassination to happen against Soleimani, because it ignores all the pressure of this inside movement. It was coming from inside, not from outside. And it was a difficult movement, but it was beginning of succeeding, because there was the Prime Minister Adel Abdelmahdi going away. There was a pressure in order to nominate a candidate more independent, and it was maybe underway. And now we are sure that it's a victory for the militia, the Shia militia, and Iran. And they will get all the grip on the government, on the security, and on economy.
Hélène, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to London in a moment. But first, back to Michael for that quick comment, please. Michael Prejeant.
Well, give me 2 minutes. I'd like to agree with pretty much everything that... I'd like to agree pretty much with everything that my British counterpart said. I cut my teeth in 2007 saying, what are we doing? We basically have picked the border core tied to Iran, and they have all this influence here, and we're actually ignoring it, and it's growing. So that's why I'm here. I've always been the Iran is here, why aren't we doing something guy. I think I've earned a lot of credibility when it comes to Iraq, and I would agree that we are not good at this. Iran is great at this. The argument was made, Saudi spends all this money on their defense, and I always said, listen, what's more efficient, Lebanese Hezbollah or an F-16 that the Saudis won't fly at night? Iran is better at this, but the general that was the best at this, Qasem Soleimani, is gone. And we should not conflate the anti-Iran protesters with the Kitab Hezbollah storming of the embassy. The protesters in Tahrir Square are alive and well, but still being shot, still being attacked by these militias. The uprising in Iraq is still going, so is it in Lebanon. And out of cultural respect for Qasem Soleimani in Iran, the protests have died down, but they will come back. So this is not a defining moment. This is a moment where Iran needs to save face, and what the Supreme Leader communicated to us today, let us do something of equal value and then promise not to do anything else. So they're already looking to de-escalate. But to think that Saudi Arabia was somehow putting pressure on Qasem Soleimani to de-escalate Iraq or that somehow Qasem Soleimani, the man in charge of escalating the situation, is somehow also the arsonist and the firefighter. Because that's exactly what he's not. He's the arsonist.
He was the messenger boy, I would argue.
No
Michael.
longer with us.
Michael, I would argue he was the messenger boy.
Yeah,
and
exactly. No, I just disagree. Qasem Soleimani is not a messenger for the Saudis. It's just not.
No. He was
that
delivering the response from Iran to the Iraqi PM in order to mediate negotiations between Saudi and Iran. That was what the Iraqi PM is on record in saying in Parliament.
Who doesn't care what he says on record? Abdul Mehdi is Soleimani's guy. Soleimani doesn't need to meet with him to tell him what the situation is. He ordered him to stand down and let Kitab Hezbollah walk into the green zone.
So why was Soleimani
there
in
is
Baghdad?
No Iran.
Why was Soleimani in Baghdad?
He was in Baghdad all the time. He's been in Baghdad.
Michael, let me just have one word. Sorry.
He's been in Baghdad since 2004. No, let me answer your question because you're asking it a certain way. He's been in Baghdad. He's been in Baghdad since 2014. Let's not just act like he just showed up that day. He's so comfortable walking around in Baghdad that he takes selfies with everyone. He was so comfortable walking around in Baghdad that he landed, went to luggage claim, talked to the protocol officer, and then met with Abu Mehdi al-Mohandes before he probably grabbed a latte before they got in the vehicles, and then he was struck. Let's not act like he came there on this important mission. That's ridiculous.
Michael, I'm not saying that was his first time at all. What I'm saying is that off the back of that...
Are you the moderator or are you the pilot?
Say again?
Michael, I'm allowing multiple
pilot.
questions to you because it seems more lively to do it that way. But if you'd like me to butt in, I will. Michael Parisian, please be quiet. Mikey, please be quiet. Hold on a second, please. Because I've got another guest to get in, sir. Hold on.
Please.
No, please. Allow me to stop you and bring in another guest who's waiting to speak as well, Elie Gerenmaye from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Michael, we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can there in Washington. Elie, in terms of what you've been hearing, are you feeling any more reassured about the situation? As we come to the close of our first part of the debate, give us your thoughts on how the situation is and how you feel it's going to develop.
Sure. I think there's three main repercussions from this assassination that we need to think about. First of all is if the United States claims that it created deterrence, I think there's a real huge question mark about this, particularly given the already mood of escalation that we have in the air. Iran has said that it will respond and it will do so militarily. And so I don't see this action as having deterred Iranian bad behavior as the US administration claims. Secondly, a point made by one of your guests about the securitization that now will unfold in Iraq. The same thing will happen in Iran. In November, we saw people going onto the streets opposing the policies of the Islamic Republic. And now, because of this new dynamic, which is essentially Iran feels that the US has declared war on the country, we are seeing seas of people coming out to the funeral of a man that to the outside world looked like a man with American blood on his hands, but in Iran is being celebrated by a strong, committed base as a hero. And I think that will have a multi-generational impact on many ordinary Iranians inside of the country.
Elie, would you say this has actually unified Iran?
I think it's a real watershed moment in terms of US image with the Iranian public. If until now Trump was known as having walked away from a nuclear deal that for a unprecedented time Iran was adhering to its international obligations, now I think that a lot of the Iranian public will blame the United States for an illegal assassination of a state official. I'm not arguing that this man was beloved by everybody inside Iran. That's not what I'm saying at all. He wasn't a black or white figure, but clearly looking at the reactions on the streets across Iran, including in areas where major protests have been happening, there will be blowback inside Iran to the US stance on Iran and in the region.
Elie Gerenmaye, thank you very much indeed. What your words, I know we've got strong reactions to come to those. We'll get them in part two of our debate. Stay with us. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. We're discussing the situation regarding Iran and the US. So we've entered 2020 in possibly the most dangerous fashion in living memory, it might seem. And here to discuss the situation, we have guests with opinions aplenty, starting with Hélène Salon from Le Monde. Thank you very much for being with us. On the other side of our studio, it's Mikey Kay, an independent foreign correspondent and former British commander working with special forces in Iraq. Mikey, thanks for joining us. Joining us from afar, first off, off in Washington. Michael de Prejean, who is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Michael, thanks for being with us. I'm getting back to you in a second because I know you've got things you need to say. And joining us from London, who we just heard of the end of our first part, Elie Gerenmayer from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Elie, please stay with us. Let's go back to Washington. Michael de Prejean needs to reply, I think, to what Elie was saying. And it was about that question I put to Elie about this act by the US in killing Soleimani. It's in many ways united opinion, united people in Iran. Would you disagree?
I would disagree. Because in Iranian culture, you can't smile after the death of a figure like Qasem Soleimani. You can't do a high five. You can't do a chest bump. You have to shut everything down for a little bit. And that's why it's so important that the two cities that Qasem Soleimani's body went through, the two areas that his body went through first, were Mashhad, where there was a massacre of about 1,500 Iranians, and then Ahwaz, where the Arab province of Iran, where there was another massacre, a put down of protesters, something that Qasem Soleimani's replacement, Ismail Qaani, has been chosen because he's able to put down dissent. He's able to put down protesters across the Shia crescent, meaning in Iran, in Iraq, and Lebanon. That message is that Soleimani's replacement is not charismatic, but he's ruthless, and he's ruthless at putting down dissent. So what happens is during the procession, the Basij will stand in the crowd, and they see anybody smile or anybody shake each other's hands or any snide remarks. That's considered treason during the mourning period. And that's why I call this a false narrative that somehow this is united Iranians behind the flag, when Qasem Soleimani brought in militias from Iraq to the Arab province of Iran to kill protesters, and then brought in the Fatah Mayun from Afghanistan that he has in Syria to come into Iran and kill protesters.
But no Iranians want any kind of foreign intervention, do they? Michael, bear with me. Ellen needs to say something. Ellen?
I think Elie will maybe...
Well, you go first, Ellen, then I'll bring in Elie. Okay.
We had testimonies in the newspaper in Le Monde of Iranians who were supportive of the protest movement, who were against the Islamic Republic, who are now supporting Soleimani as a defender of Iran against the US. So it's unhappy, but no, it united even people who were against the regime, the Iranian regime. And Elie will confirm, I guess.
You've done my job for me. Elie, over to you.
I can make the same claims on the other side.
Michael, bear with us, please. Michael, bear with us, please. Michael, please, bear with us, sir. Elie, over to you. Go ahead.
I mean, look, we don't know the official figures, but based by Western media that it's on the ground in Iran, there are hundreds of thousands, if not more, people on the streets. And to think that somehow the state apparatus has forcibly moved all these people on the streets is frankly a lacking understanding of how Iranian society really works. I have many contacts inside Iran, people who do not see themselves as supporters of the system, who have actually seen this as a moment where they need to come out in support of territorial integrity of Iran and to show that if there is some sort of a conflict with Iran, it is going to be a very long and very costly war for not just Iran, but also the United States.
Elie, thank you. Michael, quick reply from you, sir.
Okay, there's a difference between protesters coming out to support the regime. They come out under the threat of you better get out there or else, and then protesters who come out to protest the regime that are met with Evin prison, that are met with bullets, that are suppressed in Mashhad and suppressed in Ahwaz. People are shocked by Qasem Soleimani's death. I'll give you that. Nobody expected the U.S. president to kill Qasem Soleimani. So there's some shock, but there are so many generals inside the IRGC that are happy Qasem Soleimani's gone. They thought he was growing too high in his stature. Even the supreme leader's close network was concerned about Soleimani getting to a point where he could be the next guy instead of Raisi. So I'm not Iranian, but I talk to Iranians, and I talk to a lot of different ones. And there's no way you can own the narrative that all Iranians inside the country are somehow united behind the flag.
Michael Prejean in Washington, thank you very much indeed. Cries of death to America, those sound very united, don't they, Mikey, when you hear it on the news broadcasts? And I know sometimes the news can, by the nature of what we have to do, distort things. But what's your feeling? Bear with us, Michael, please.
No, and you know, I actually agree with Michael. The death to America chant is nothing new, and it won't be anything new
40 years old.
Because you will have those hardliners inside Iran that will never be persuaded. You have those hardliners in Iran that didn't agree with the JCPOA. You've got Rouhani, who is sort of more moderate and willing to negotiate with the West, and you've got the Ayatollah, who's very hardline. It's sort of this give and take.
Without the power to negotiate, the Supreme Leader decides everything.
Bear with us, please, Michael.
I agree with that, Michael. Where I think it's important now from the US perspective. Okay, we talked about the process on the ground. We talked about how does the US fare in all of this, I think, is where we need to be going. That will determine who the next Prime Minister of Iraq is. Do I think that the power of the Shia clerics, al-Sistani inside Iraq, will be affected by this? Probably not, actually. And it is with the grace of the Shia clerics inside Iraq that will give the new Prime Minister their blessing, and that new Prime Minister will have to have some form of agenda or policy, which is withdrawal of US troops from Iraq. Now, the existential threat globally to national security is Salafi-based extremist ideology. And in order for America to fight that, it needs to go to the places where it is thriving. Iraq is one of those places where it is thriving. And without the ability to home base, without the ability to be able to ally with certain proxies on the ground, the SDF in Syria was a classic. Without that ability to do that in Iraq, that's where we start getting into a sticky situation. So yes, there's an Iran issue going on at the moment, which may peter out, which may not. But the biggest threat really is that existential threat, which is still there, which is the Islamic State 3.0, which has gone underground, which isn't caliphate-based anymore, which isn't a territorial-based organization. It is how do you counter that when it's thriving? And I've got Kurdish counterterrorism intelligence sources. They've been going after Islamic State 2.0, 3.0 inside Kirkuk, Tikrit, ever since Mosul fell. And it's not getting any better. So that's the interesting bit for me is that how do you mitigate that threat? And the fact that America now has taken its eye off fighting the Islamic State and has now put it towards the PMUs and the Shia militias.
Has this act of killing Soleimani, though, is this something that's going to make Iraqis feel closer to Iran, closer to the US? What do we feel about that? Ellen, could I ask you that question?
If it will make them closer to Iran
or the US?
Of course, Iran. I mean, maybe in Iraq you don't have the same phenomenon as in Iran, where you have a great support for Soleimani, but there is a unity of the Shia camp, and it was not existing before. So, and thanks to that, there was maybe the possibility to have an independent prime minister. Now that the Shia camp is unified.
You got to be kidding me. None of this happens.
Michael, please bear with us.
Of course, there is a unity now. They just vote all together to the resolution, which is non-binding, but they were all together, and they failed 3 times before.
No, they were not together. 40% were together. 40%
it was the Shia. I'm talking about the Shia camp. All the Shia camp was there, and they are the majority. And they failed the same resolution 3 times, but this time they succeeded because now they are united, and so they could maybe decide who will be the next prime minister, who will put into application this resolution, and. It's not decided yet. Maybe the decision of the government could be to keep a part of the coalition, of its mission, maybe to get rid of all of it. It will be maybe depending on the next prime minister. You have the fight against ISIS, which will be a big problem. So, yes, I think United States have been really absent of Iraq for 1 year after Trump, and now they lost the ground.
Ellen, thank you much indeed. Michael, please bear with us. Let's bring in Ellie from London for another thought. Ellie, over to you. You've been listening to what people are saying. What thoughts do you have?
I mean, I think we need to understand that both Iraq and Iran are extremely complex, complicated societies. Power structures are extremely complicated. So drawing these very simplistic viewpoints of who runs the show, I don't think is going to be conducive to setting the right policies, particularly in the West. I do think the Iraqis have made their voices heard that they want less foreign interference in their affairs, whether that's Iran or, frankly, the United States. But given the nature of this assassination on Iraqi soil, without any sort of consultation with the Iraqis about the repercussions that that may have for their country, will serve as a major blow to U.S. presence inside Iraq, I think, for the weeks, months, and years potentially ahead. I do think there should be a real concern about extremist forces like ISIS exploiting the current crisis within the international community and also the fragility within Iraq domestically to gain an upper hand. We did have this very unique moment under the previous administration in the United States where de facto Iran, Iraq, and the United States were coordinating their operations against ISIS. And I do think that history will look at that as a point where the international community together was able to push back these forces. I think it should be a real point of concern about how these groups will now seek to exploit potential vacuums in security if indeed coalition forces, NATO forces, and US forces draw back. And by the way, this will be a major issue of concern for Iran on itself, which shares a very long porous border with Iraq.
Ellie, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Washington. Michael Prejean. Over to you, sir.
Okay, it doesn't matter who the prime minister was going to be in Iraq, as long as Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes and Qasem Soleimani exerted control over the Shia political parties that voted to exit the United States yesterday and annex Iraq to Iran, it wouldn't have mattered. That's why it's so important for people to know. I don't think this is simplex at all. I get the debate, I get the language here, but I think it's really important for us to understand where the power centers are in Iraq. They're not in the Sunni sector. They're not in the Kurdish sector. They're in the Shia political parties.
100%.
And it was the Shia youth that were protesting against the Shia political parties because they thought, hey, our guys are in charge of Baghdad. Yet we don't have water in Basra. We don't have electricity in Basra. And this isn't right. 60% of Iraq's population is under the age of 30. For the first time in Iraq, all three ethno-sectarian power centers feel disenfranchised by this government because of its ties to Iran and because of the Shia political parties being corrupt and sending money to Tehran. This is a vote by roughly 25% of the population, because only 30% voted in 2018, and we got this party together. And it's important to note that it was Qasem Soleimani that negotiated this government in Beirut with Nasrallah and Muqtada al-Sadr. And they brought us Abdul Mahdi, a great guy, Barham Saleh, a great guy, and Mohammed al-Bulsi, someone that nobody had ever heard of, who joined the Fatah party. And this government was made to bend. And we saw it bend.
Michael,
and the best chance Iraq has, one second. Everybody else talk for 30 minutes. Let me just get one point in here.
Michael, go ahead, please, because time is against us, sir.
Now,
please finish.
Okay, I'm trying to talk, but you're talking over me. The best chance Baghdad has is because Qasem Soleimani doesn't exist anymore. And I've been waiting to hear the UN condemnation of Qasem Soleimani's militias killing unarmed Shia youth in Basra, Nazariya, Karbala, Najaf, and Basra. And we haven't heard anything from the UN to condemn that.
Michael, thank you.
Anyway,
let's bring in Mike Hughes, got a point to make.
Yeah, no, and again, I mean, there's no silver bullet here, and I don't have all the answers. But the big question I have in my own mind is, was there more opportunity for America to the US to be able to control the Salafi-based ideology problem in Iraq, and at the same time leverage what was going on inside Iraq in terms of the protests and the dissident uprising between the Shia youth, as Michael pointed out, and the PMUs and the Shia clerics? And my question, and I don't know the answer to it, is, was the killing of Soleimani a mistake?
I probably do.
Well, hear me out for 30 seconds. My only question is that if Soleimani had been left alone, was there more opportunity from a diplomatic and maybe a more clandestine perspective for America to have influence on what was going on inside Iraq, rather than going to kinetic activity which has tactical and short-term maybe positive influences for them, but longer term not?
Mikey, thank you. Michael, think about your answer, because before you, I'm going to go back to Ellie Geremeyer in London for a further comment. And Ellie, the thing about this debate for me...
answer. It'd be 30 seconds.
Bear with me, Michael. No, I need to go to Ellie first, if you don't mind, sir. Ellie, for me, what we're hearing now is a debate which is really talking about this as if things are happening just within Iraqi and Iranian space. Isn't the danger that what has happened will actually push the threat beyond that? And, for instance... any ally of the United States now, possibly their interests, their bases, their property, their people are also now under threat. It's actually enlarging the scale of the problem.
Well, look, I've had multiple officials who are on the ground in the region over the last few months, allies of the United States, I should say, discuss with me their concerns that if there is further escalation kinetically between the US and Iran, they are going to be the front line for the first base of attack, whether that's from the Iranian side or from the US side, frankly, as it carried out inside Iraqi territory. So whether that's in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates or Israel, frankly, I think there is a risk. I don't think it's highly likely at this stage, but there is a risk that this could engulf into something much larger. And look, you can't have it both ways, saying that Qasem Soleimani, by taking him out, we are going to dislodge Iranian capabilities, and at the same time argue that his replacement is going to be the most repressive action man now in the region. I do think my assessment is that the IRGC has a very sophisticated command and control structure within its own forces. There was a replacement within hours appointed for Qasem Soleimani. He was indeed a very popular, charismatic figure within his own system, but by no means the only man that the Islamic Republic relied on. And so in terms of regional reach and capability, I do think that we are going to see more of a problem on our hands vis-a-vis US presence in the region and Iranian presence that could actually threaten the interests of US partners and allies who are the closest and neighbors of Iran.
Indeed, and those thoughts echoed a little earlier by Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, and he gave his news conference. Michael, back to you, sir. You had your thoughts regarding what Mikey was saying earlier. The thing about all of this, the situation just got more dangerous. Okay, I'll concede that. This isn't about, whether or not the Middle East is safer because Qasem Soleimani is gone. But in the last 4 months, the Hashid al-Shaabi and Mohandes and the Baghdad government has denied the U.S. the ability to go after ISIS. They denied us their airspace. They haven't let us leave our bases. And this is a big concern inside the National Security Council that, hey, this is impacting our fight against ISIS. I thought the government of Iraq was supposed to be an ally in this. If you look at the areas where ISIS has been liberated, or the areas that have been liberated from ISIS, ISIS is still operating, as your other guest called it, at the 3.0 level, the al-Qaeda model. But yet the U.S. wasn't able to action those targets. Kataib Hezbollah launched a drone attack from southern Iraq into Saudi Arabia. And before that drone attack, Mohandes put pressure on Baghdad to deny U.S. reconnaissance assets the ability to look south, because he said, no, you guys are fighting ISIS. That's up in the Sunni areas. There's no reason for you to look down south towards Muthana and Maysan province. So that's an issue. So Baghdad was already hurting our ability to go after ISIS because we were listening to a sovereign government say, okay, you don't want us to use your airspace, we won't. But now we're not in that place anymore. ISIS is an existential threat. We can't trust Baghdad to deal with it, so we have to deal with it ourselves. Indeed, and you carried out the drone strike on Baghdad, as you neatly pointed out. Mikey?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I'd argue that CIA operations and drone operations don't necessarily require authorization from the Baghdad government to fly, but that's why that's
not our train and assist program with the Iraqi security forces and the ISAF.
Agree.
Those are two different things.
Agree.
Two different things.
Agree. But what I'm saying is that the U.S. has been operating drones inside Iraqi airspace with impunity.
Michael?
The agency has. But the U.S. Advise and Assist program requires that we work with the Iraqi security forces to go after ISIS, not rely on CIA drones that can do whatever they want regardless of government permission. We're talking about a U.S. presence in Iraq to work with the Iraqi government to go after ISIS, and then all of a sudden seeing the inability to work with them. That's what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Okay, let's pause there. Ellen, over to you in terms of your knowledge of Mosul, of the area. What is your feeling? Is the threat of ISIS about to come back 3.0, as Mikey was saying? Is that something that's really imminent?
Yeah, we still have some areas that are having some sleeping cells, and we have seen a lot of big operation for the last months in Mount Amrin or in the desert of Anbar, and there is still a lot of building of sleeping cell. I've also go after the financial cells, like they are building a network of companies where they can send monies to their sleeping cells. So it's really worrying if you don't have. I mean, Iraqi forces are still in the process of building. If you don't have the pursuit of the program of formation, assisting them to build up, it will be a big problem for the Iraqi force to do this job alone, because the removal of the US forces is also the removal of the coalition forces, certainly, that we can observe. So yes, there is a real risk of having a sleeping cell build up to a biggest presence.
Okay, we're entering the final stages. Mikey?
Yeah, and just building on what Ellen said, you cannot degrade the Islamic State unless you've got allied partners, boots on the ground, that will partner with JTACs, Joint Terminal Air Controllers, who are the main conduit between the rebel force, the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the Iraqi CTS, or whomever it may be, and the fighter in the sky that is dropping the precision-guided bomb. And unless you have that capability, the ability to degrade the Islamic State, especially now in the phase of 3.0, will be reduced significantly. And that's the worry, one of the primary worries of how that is going to affect the West's ability, not just the US. The Brits have been in there, France have been in there. How do we take on Islamic State 3.0, because they're not going to stop weaponizing propaganda?
Indeed, it happens on so many layers and so many levels that it is such a difficult adversary to pin down. This is the biggest issue, isn't it, I suppose? Over to Ellie in London. Ellie, we kicked off this debate by talking about it being the most dangerous start to a new year in possibly in living memory. Perhaps I exaggerated a bit there. And in terms of what we've been hearing here, perhaps the immediate threat isn't that large. However, as you were saying earlier, it's difficult to quantify. It's difficult to know where it goes next. Do you feel that there is this threat, that we should be scared of what happens next, and that maybe there are factors at play here that we're yet to discover?
Look, I mean, no doubt there is this common threat to all the regional players, including Iran, and international actors, including the United States, which is what happens to ISIS 3.0 going forward, and who's going to fight that fight and whose problem it's going to be. That's one issue. I think an immediate area of concern in terms of interstate conflict really lies with the fact that there is so much uncertainty and unpredictability surrounding President Trump, what he wants and what the U.S. strategy is going to be going forward. I think that people have been scratching their heads from whether the president really wants a diplomatic outcome and a diplomatic solution versus if he and his aides are seeking regime change, given their posture during the protests in Iran in November, and versus now when in an election year when he is, I'm sure, looking for ways to divert attention from an impeachment, may look to heat up media attention on a conflict in the Middle East with Iran. And I think if you're sitting in Tehran and you're trying to decide how you will react to what you view as a act of war in terms of the killing of Soleimani, but you nevertheless do not want to create a full-scale conflict with the United States, and I don't believe Iran is looking for this, it's going to be very tricky for them to know exactly what step to take next, because they tried to look at the diplomatic pathway, and President Macron put an offer on the table that both sides considered, but in the end, the US president, who was in a position of strength, was I'm willing
you have
to
to let me
take.
get in here. This is like a dialogue, monologue thing. Let me get in here and say something.
Michael, we're at the end of the
things that are
show,
just
Michael. If you can be
factually
extremely quickly, and I can give you 10 seconds, Michael. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, before Zarif landed to speak to Macron, and I was on France 24 saying this, Zarif took ballistic missiles off the negotiating table, and that's what sank the deal with Trump. When Macron met with Trump, it was about ballistic missiles. Before that meeting, Zarif said, we're not going to talk about it.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Michael Persian in Washington, thank you, sir, very much indeed. Elie Guérin-Maillet, sorry for stopping you there, from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you as ever. Thanks to our guests in the studio, Mikey Kay, independent foreign correspondent, and as we know, some of the great experience on the ground in Iraq. Great to meet you, sir. And thanks to our correspondent from Le Monde here in Paris, Hélène Salon. Thank you for joining us. And thanks to you for watching. Stay with us. More to come here, live from Paris.